How does the tech that runs our world really work? We break it down to its fundamental truths. This is First Principles.
When you look at a photograph, you don't see a million tiny squares of color information. You see a familiar face, a sprawling landscape, a beloved pet. It's instant, effortless, and utterly intuitive. Your brain, in a fraction of a second, performs a feat of recognition so profound we rarely give it a second thought. But what if I told you that for a computer, a photograph is just a million tiny squares of color information, a vast, overwhelming grid of numbers, utterly devoid of inherent meaning? And yet, these machines can now identify your grandmother in a blurry crowd, detect a tumor on an X-ray, or navigate a self-driving car through chaotic city streets. This isn't magic, though it often feels like it. This is computer vision, and on this episode of First Principles, we're going to open that black box and discover the surprisingly elegant rules that teach machines to see. The magic we see today is so pervasive it's almost invisible. Think about your smartphone. You lift it, and in an instant, it knows it's you. A quick scan, and access is granted. No password, no PIN, just a silent affirmation of identity. Or consider the sprawling, often overwhelming collections of photos most of us have accumulated. Google Photos, Apple Photos. They don't just store them, they understand them. You can search for cat, and suddenly every feline friend you've ever captured appears. Search for beach vacation, and your memories from Cancun or Malibu surface. It's as if the computer has an intelligent curator inside, tirelessly sifting through your visual history. Beyond our personal devices, the impact grows exponentially. In factories, cameras monitor assembly lines, detecting microscopic flaws in products that no human eye could ever consistently spot. In medicine, AI analyzes medical scans, MRIs, CTs, X-rays, to help doctors identify diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's at earlier stages, sometimes even seeing patterns too subtle for human specialists. In agriculture, drones equipped with vision systems fly over fields, assessing crop health, identifying pests and optimizing irrigation, transforming how we grow our food. And, of course, there's the self-driving car. That vehicle navigates the world by continuously processing a torrent of visual data, identifying other cars, pedestrians, traffic lights, and road signs, making split-second decisions based on what it sees. It's a technology that is fundamentally reshaping industries, enhancing our daily lives, and pushing the boundaries of what we thought machines were capable of. It's no longer a niche academic pursuit, it's a foundational layer of modern society. But how did we get here? And what exactly is the problem we're trying to solve when we teach a machine to see? Imagine a world without sight for machines. For decades, that was our reality. Computers were powerful calculators, logic engines, data processors. They could store vast amounts of information, execute complex programs, and communicate across networks. But they were blind. If you wanted a computer to recognize something in the real world, you had to manually encode every possible scenario, every distinct feature. This wasn't just difficult. It was functionally impossible for anything but the simplest, most controlled environments. The world, after all, is messy, unpredictable, and infinitely varied. The fundamental problem was profound. A computer doesn't see an image, not in the way a human does anyway. When a digital camera captures a photograph, it converts the light hitting its sensor into a massive grid of numbers. Each number represents the color and brightness of a single point, a pixel. For a standard high-definition image, that could be millions of pixels. So, if you show a computer an image of a cat, what it receives is a giant spreadsheet, a grid where each cell contains a number or 3 numbers for red, green, and blue color channels. To the computer, this is just data. A numerical pattern. It has no inherent concept of fur, whiskers, eyes, or catness. The challenge was how to bridge the enormous chasm between a grid of abstract numbers and the rich, meaningful objects we instantly perceive. In the early days of artificial intelligence, pioneers tackled this problem with brute force and human ingenuity. Their approach was straightforward, if ultimately limited. Program the computer to look for specific features. If you wanted the computer to find a cat, you might try to tell it, look for 2 round shapes near the top. Those could be eyes. Look for a small triangle below them. That could be a nose. Find some vertical lines extending from the sides. Those are whiskers. And if you see a general furry texture, that's probably the body. This was called feature engineering. Think of it like trying to teach a child to identify a chair by giving them an exhaustive checklist. It has 4 legs. It has a flat surface for sitting. It usually has a backrest. It's often made of wood or metal. This works for a very specific, idealized chair. But what about a beanbag chair, a bar stool, a rocking chair? The hand-coded rules quickly became brittle. A slight change in lighting, a different angle, partial obstruction, or a new style of chair, and the carefully crafted program would fail spectacularly. The world was simply too varied, too nuanced, for humans to explicitly write down every single rule for every single object in every possible scenario. It was like trying to describe the taste of an apple using only chemical formulas. You might capture some essence, but you'd miss the experience entirely. The problem, then, was not merely about processing data. It was about understanding data, about extracting meaning from raw sensory input in a way that mimicked human perception. It was about moving beyond explicit instructions to something more akin to learning. This quest for a more flexible, adaptive form of machine vision led researchers down many dead ends, but eventually it led to a profound shift in thinking. Instead of trying to tell the computer what to look for, the revolutionary idea was to create a system that could learn what to look for, all on its own. Now let's open that black box. Imagine you're teaching a child to recognize different animals. You don't give them a strict set of rules like, a dog has 4 legs, barks, and wags its tail. Instead, you show them many pictures. This is a dog. This is also a dog. This is not a dog, it's a cat. This is a horse. Gradually, through exposure and correction, the child develops an internal model, a nuanced understanding of what makes a dog, even if they can't articulate all the rules. Computer vision, particularly in its modern, powerful form, operates on a similar principle, but with a mathematical twist. The core analogy here is not about explicit rules, but about filters and layers. Think of those old transparent overlays animators used, where each layer added a little more detail to the final image. That's a helpful way to visualize how a machine learns to see, layer by layer, starting from the most fundamental visual elements. The first critical question we need to ask, if a computer only sees numbers, is, how do we get it to see anything meaningful at all? How does it go from a grid of pixel values to identifying something as simple as a line or a corner? This brings us to the first principle, the foundational concept that truly unlocked the potential of machine vision, the convolutional neural network, or CNN. A CNN doesn't operate by looking at the entire image at once and trying to find a cat. Instead, it starts with the absolute most basic visual information possible. Imagine a tiny window, just a few pixels wide, sliding across the entire image, pixel by pixel. This window is called a filter, or a kernel, And what this filter does is incredibly simple yet profoundly powerful. It looks for a very specific, low-level pattern. Let's say one filter is designed to detect a horizontal edge. As it slides across the image, it performs a mathematical operation, essentially comparing the pixel values within its tiny window. If it finds a sudden sharp change in brightness from top to bottom within its window, it registers a strong hit for a horizontal edge. If the pixels are all roughly the same color, it registers a miss. This process, this sliding window applying a filter, is called convolution. And the result of applying this filter across the entire image is a new simplified image, a feature map, where bright spots indicate where that specific horizontal edge pattern was found. Another filter might be looking for vertical edges, another for diagonal lines, another for a particular color gradient. Crucially, these aren't filters that humans explicitly program. This is the aha moment of the early layers of a CNN. The network learns these filters itself. It's not told, find horizontal lines. Instead, through a process of trial and error, by being shown millions of labeled images, millions of pictures of cats and not cats, the network adjusts these filters. It tweaks the numbers within those tiny windows until the filters become incredibly good at detecting the most fundamental visual building blocks that distinguish one object from another. So, the first layer of a CNN doesn't see a cat. It sees an image broken down into its most atomic components. A map of all the horizontal lines, another map of all the vertical lines, another map of all the diagonal lines, and so on. It's like distilling a complex piece of music down to just the presence or absence of individual notes, or a painting into just the most basic brushstrokes. These are the first principles of visual information for a machine. Now here's where the layers part of the convolutional neural network becomes critical. Once the first layer has extracted these basic features, edges, gradients, simple textures, it passes these feature maps to the next layer. This second layer doesn't look at the original pixel data anymore. It looks at the output of the first layer. Imagine our second layer has its own set of sliding filters. But instead of looking for individual lines, these filters are now looking for combinations of those lines. A filter in the second layer might learn to detect a corner by finding a horizontal line intersecting with a vertical line. Another might learn to detect a simple curve by seeing a series of short diagonal lines arranged in a specific way. Yet another might detect a small circle, perhaps two opposing curved lines. So, the second layer builds on the foundation of the first, identifying slightly more complex shapes and patterns. It's abstracting the visual information a step further. This process continues, layer after layer, deeper and deeper into the network. Each subsequent layer takes the output of the previous layer, the feature maps, and applies its own set of learned filters to identify increasingly abstract and complex patterns. So, in a simplified view of a CNN trying to identify a cat, Layer 1 learns to detect fundamental elements like edges, lines, and simple color blobs. Layer 2 combines these elements to recognize simple shapes, corners, circles, textures, perhaps even very rudimentary eye-like or ear-like shapes. Layer 3 combines these shapes to form more complex features, a distinct eye, a nose, a mouth, a whisker cluster. Layer 4 and beyond combines these complex features to identify entire parts of the cat, the specific shape of a feline ear, the characteristic pattern of fur on a cat's head, the overall silhouette of a cat's body. The final layer, often called the classification layer, then takes all these highly processed abstract features and makes a decision. Based on the presence and arrangement of these increasingly sophisticated features, it calculates the probability that the original image contains a cat. It might say, "I see features strongly associated with a cat, so there's a 98% chance this is a cat, a 1% chance it's a dog, and a 1% chance it's a loaf of bread." The true genius, the deep aha moment here, is that no human explicitly programs the network to look for eyes, noses, or even edges. The entire system, from the most basic edge detectors in the first layer to the complex object detectors in the deeper layers, is learned automatically. When the CNN is trained, it's fed millions of images, some labeled cat, some labeled dog, some car, some tree. For each image, it makes a guess. If its guess is wrong, the network subtly adjusts the numbers inside its filters and the connections between its layers. This adjustment is guided by a mathematical process called backpropagation, which essentially tells the network how much each little numerical tweak contributes to getting the correct answer. Over millions and millions of iterations, these adjustments cause the filters to spontaneously discover the most statistically effective visual features for distinguishing one object from another. It learns that detecting edges is a useful first step. It learns that combining edges into corners and curves helps. It learns that combining those into eyes and noses is even better. It doesn't know what an eye is in a human sense, but it learns that a particular arrangement of light and shadow, a specific set of curves and colors, is a highly reliable indicator of an eye, and that eyes are highly correlated with faces, and faces with people. The network develops its own internal, hierarchical representation of the visual world, building complexity from the simplest, most fundamental patterns. It's a journey from meaningless pixels to profound understanding, all through the relentless application of simple mathematical operations across layers of learned filters. But even with this sophisticated layered approach, detecting edges and shapes, and combining them into recognizable objects, there's still a monumental challenge. The world isn't static. Objects can be seen from different angles, under varying lighting conditions, partially obscured. A cat viewed from the front looks very different from a cat viewed from the side, or a cat curled up sleeping, or a cat in shadow. How does the network achieve this robustness, this ability to recognize the same object despite vast perceptual differences? This leads us to another critical component within the CNN architecture, the pooling layer. After a convolutional layer extracts its feature maps, its maps of edges, corners, or textures, these maps can still be quite large and retain a lot of fine-grained detail. Imagine a map showing every single horizontal line detected in an image. If the cat shifts slightly to the left, all those line detections would shift too, potentially confusing subsequent layers. The pooling layer addresses this by introducing a form of spatial invariance. Think of it like this. Instead of worrying about the exact position of every single line or corner, what if we just cared if that feature was present in a general area? A pooling layer essentially downsamples the feature map. It takes a small region of the map, say a 2x2 grid of values, and reduces it to a single value. The most common type is max pooling, where it simply takes the maximum value from that 2x2 grid. So, if even one strong horizontal line was detected anywhere within that 2x2 area, the output of the pooling layer will show that a horizontal line was indeed present in that general vicinity, but it loses the precise coordinate. This might sound counterintuitive. Why would you throw away information? The reason is twofold. First, it drastically reduces the amount of data that needs to be processed by subsequent layers, making the network more efficient. Second, and more importantly, it makes the network more robust to small shifts and distortions in the input image. If a cat moves a few pixels to the left, the exact pixel locations of its features change. But because pooling summarizes features in a region, the presence of those features in the general area remains stable. This means the network can still recognize the cat, even if it's slightly shifted or rotated, without needing to learn separate filters for every minute variation. It makes the network capable of generalizing from its training data, recognizing objects even when they appear in novel, slightly different ways. So, a typical convolutional neural network stacks these layers. A convolutional layer to extract features, followed by a pooling layer to make those features robust to position changes. Then another convolutional layer for more complex features, followed by another pooling layer, and so on. This repeated pattern of convolution and pool allows the network to gradually distill the vast pixel-level information into a much smaller, highly abstract and incredibly meaningful representation of the image. By the time the information reaches the final classification layer, it's no longer a grid of raw pixels. It's a compact, rich set of high-level features that encode the presence of things like cat eyes, cat fur texture, and cat body shape, largely independent of their exact pixel coordinates. This multi-layered, hierarchical approach is why CNNs are so effective at learning visual patterns, and why they form the backbone of virtually all modern computer vision applications. But there's an even deeper, more profound principle at play that elevates computer vision from merely impressive to truly astonishing. It's a principle that wasn't immediately obvious to early researchers and whose full implications are still being explored. It's the unseen giant that silently enables the entire system to achieve its incredible accuracy and generalization. The sheer, unfathomable scale of data and computational power required to train these networks. Imagine a human child learning to recognize objects. They see a few examples of a cat, and they quickly generalize. They might make mistakes initially, calling a small dog a cat, but with a relatively small number of examples and gentle correction, their visual recognition abilities become incredibly sophisticated. Our brains are incredibly efficient learning machines, especially for vision. For a computer, it's different. While the CNN architecture allows the network to learn the features itself, the quality and quantity of that learning are directly proportional to the amount of data it sees. To train a state-of-the-art computer vision model that can reliably identify thousands of different objects, these networks need to be exposed to millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of meticulously labeled images. Consider ImageNet, one of the most famous datasets in computer vision. It contains over 14 million images, manually labeled by humans, across more than 20,000 categories. Each image might have multiple labels, showing not just cat, but also Siamese cat or Persian cat. This wasn't just collecting images, it was a monumental, painstaking effort of human annotation, identifying bounding boxes around objects and classifying every discernible item. This massive dataset provided the fuel for the deep learning revolution. Without it, even the most ingenious CNN architecture would be like a superpowered car with an empty fuel tank. The common misconception is that a computer vision model is programmed with knowledge. The truth is, it's trained on data, and this training process is computationally intensive to an almost unimaginable degree. Imagine those mathematical operations, the convolutions, the pooling, the adjustments to filter weights, being performed millions of times across millions of images for tens or even hundreds of layers. This requires specialized hardware, primarily graphics processing units, GPUs, which were originally designed for rendering complex video game graphics but turned out to be perfectly suited for the parallel computations required by neural networks. A single training run for a truly cutting-edge model can take weeks or even months, consuming the energy equivalent of a small town. The unseen giant, then, is not a single principle, but the symbiotic relationship between algorithmic innovation and the relentless scale of data and computation. The breakthrough of CNNs provided the mechanism for learning, but the availability of colossal curated datasets and the brute force of modern computing provided the engine that allowed that mechanism to actually realize its potential. It taught us that intelligence in machines, at least for vision, wasn't just about clever algorithms, but also about simulating a form of experience, seeing countless examples, learning from them, and adapting just as a human might, but at an industrial scale. This ability to learn from vast amounts of data, rather than being explicitly programmed, is what truly sets modern computer vision apart and makes it so adaptable and powerful. So where does this leave us? We've journeyed from the effortless magic of facial recognition on our phones to the gritty reality of pixels and numbers. We've seen how early attempts to teach computers to see by explicitly programming rules were fundamentally limited by the boundless complexity of the real world. We then opened the black box of computer vision, revealing the elegant simplicity of the convolutional neural network. At its core, a CNN is a multi-layered filter system. The first layers learn to detect the most basic visual primitives, edges, lines, gradients, through a process of statistical learning, not human instruction. Subsequent layers build upon these primitives, combining them to recognize progressively more complex shapes and features, like corners, circles, textures, and eventually, the defining characteristics of objects like eyes, noses, or car wheels. The pooling layers then provide robustness, allowing the network to recognize these features even when they shift slightly in position or appearance. The true aha moment is the realization that the network discovers these hierarchical features on its own, driven by vast datasets and immense computational power, optimizing its internal filters to become exquisitely attuned to the visual patterns that define our world. This understanding of computer vision, from its first principles, doesn't diminish its marvel, it deepens it. It shows us that what appears to be intuitive sight in a machine is, in fact, an incredible feat of mathematical distillation, a painstaking process of abstracting meaning from raw data, layer by layer. It's a testament to the power of learning over explicit programming, a profound shift in how we build intelligent systems. It teaches us that sometimes the most complex capabilities emerge from the repeated application of surprisingly simple rules, scaled to an unprecedented degree, and in a world increasingly perceived and navigated by machines. Understanding how they see is no longer just academic curiosity. It's a fundamental insight into the future we are collectively building.
You've been listening to First Principles. Until next time, stay curious.